Good morning, dear ones, and welcome to Unity Church. A very special welcome to those of you who are visiting us today. This morning we tune in from our singular rooms to join together in worship. Welcome to this time we set aside each week to help us find and keep our balance, to think about those things that matter most, to root out racism in ourselves and in the world, and to align ourselves with integrity, service, and joy. Here in the sanctuary, your worship leaders gather, taking appropriate precautions, learning as we lead, to offer clarity, comfort, and inspiration in these trying times. We know that nothing can replace the face-to-face, hand-in-hand, voices raised in song that embodied worship can bring. We also know that the ministry of this congregation has never been about a building. This church is not closed. After the service, whether this is your first time with us or you've been here your whole life, you are invited to participate in a virtual Zoom coffee hour, where we share a bit of our lives with each other and get to know one another more deeply. Stay for just a few minutes, or stay for up to 45 minutes to connect in smaller breakout rooms. Information about how to participate is available on Unity's homepage, and the link to coffee hour will be shared at the end of this service. If you would like to learn more about Unity Church and Unitarian Universalism, we invite you to participate in Finding Yourself at Unity today at 1 p.m. The topic of this 1-hour online offering is Membership 101 and Congregational Life. Information about how to connect with the class is also available on our homepage. Next Sunday, I invite you to join me and worship associate Shelley Butler for a service entitled The Journey Begins Beneath Our Feet. Together, we will explore how we see and claim the ground beneath our feet as the best and only place to begin our journeys of spiritual growth and our quest for justice. In the coming days and weeks, we will continue to find new ways to come together for worship, for learning, for deep connection, for justice, and for love. Welcome and stay tuned.
In the cloistered courtyard of my apartment building. My neighbor Danielle and I swing and chat. Danielle and I are both white, though of course we rarely think of ourselves that way. Touched by our recent study at school of the civil rights movement, I tell Danielle, you know, if I were alive back then, I would have wanted to be black. Why, she demands. Why would you want to be treated so bad? Well, I say, I wouldn't want to be treating other people so bad. I would feel guilty. I would want to be one of the marchers instead. I know I still have so much to learn, but I can say that I've learned a thing or two since, being 8. And among my learnings are these. Back then, the civil rights movement really wasn't that long ago. Racism has never ended. It moves in the world, in us, in me today. And of course, I can't choose to escape my whiteness. None of us chose the skin we were born in, and we can't choose our way out of it either. But as a white person, there is a choice I do get to make. I could choose to remain blind to my whiteness and everything that it brings, or I hope I can learn to wear it with awareness so that I may work to minimize its harm and be one of the marchers anyway. Come, let us worship together. Please join me in reading the Unison Affirmation. These words, written by W.E.B. Du Bois, are displayed on your screen. Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. It is today that we fit ourselves for the greater usefulness of tomorrow. Today is the seed time. Now are the hours of work, and tomorrow comes the harvest and the playtime. Now we pause in silence.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together, we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability and addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison, those who care for family members in ill health, those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world, and for the people of this courageous congregation, as together we live into our longing to embody and help to build the beloved community. Will you pray with me for all these we now name? We hold in our hearts Barb Cedarberg and her children, grandchildren, and larger family as they grieve the death of Barb's father, Al Cedarberg, who passed away last Sunday at the age of 97. Graveside services have been held. He will be missed by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We also hold J.P. Horan Kimzel, his wife Laura, and son Caden in love and prayer as J.P. enters hospice care at home and begins the last part of his journey with Huntington's disease. And we join Sarah Bergen and her children in grieving the death of Sarah's husband, Matt Bergen, who died unexpectedly from a heart attack this Saturday. He was a beloved husband of 22 years to Sarah and a devoted father to Milo, Emmett, and Frankie. Matt was an accomplished artist, and his time in his art studio was his spiritual practice. Matt's sharp sense of humor, his generous way of caring for family, friends, and community will be dearly missed. In the words of his son Emmett, everyone who met Dad liked him. A memorial service is pending. Finally, we join our senior co-ministers, Rob and Jan Eller Isaacs, and Hannah and Tim Franco Isaacs, in celebrating the arrival of one more Redeemer into their family this past week. Levi Alexander Franco Isaacs was born to parents Hannah and Tim on Friday, and both baby Levi and Mama Hannah are doing well. Elated grandparents Rob and Jan are with them in Portland, Oregon for the joyful occasion. which Rob has described with just 2 words: love abounds. May we stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here at home and all around the world. May they and may we be instruments of a just and lasting peace. I now invite you to speak aloud or hold in the silent sanctuary of your hearts the names of those you would like to lift today in worship. And let us pray. Spirit of life, Spirit of many names and beyond all naming, Spirit that connects all living beings to one another and to the mysteries of the universe. In this time of uncertainty and ever-shifting terrain, please help us find wells of resolve inside ourselves. May we find within the elasticity and purpose we need to meet this moment with care and with courage. And when we find ourselves depleted or stuck, may we be able to ask for and accept support from our neighbors and from strangers with whom we find solidarity, so that we may transform our fatigue and gratitude into gratitude for another day, and so that we may in turn find ourselves with more than enough love to be generous with those around us. It is our prayer that these bonds of care, forged with loved ones and new acquaintances, allow us to know, on a scale as small as our cells and as broad as all the sky, what it is to love and to be loved. Amen.
My family loves telling stories, mainly stories about us and our past, our memories. My sisters, my aunts, my cousins, anytime we get together, it will not be very long at all before we start talking about other times we were together and the people who were there and the things that we did. Now, this drives my wife crazy. She wishes that we would talk about now or the future, about current events. And I understand that, because she wasn't part of most of these old stories. But for my family, the chance to get together and remind ourselves of who we are, what we've done, what we said, and the people who aren't there with us anymore, it just tells us who we are and makes us strong. I want to tell a story today about stories, but it's not a story about my family. It's actually a story about our possible future, and it is set in outer space. So if you want to come a little closer to the screen, we will go where no one has gone before. Okay, now I know that some of you, when you heard that last thing I said, probably know I'm going to tell a story about Star Trek. Okay, and Star Trek is set in outer space, right? Okay, this story is from The Next Generation, and I love how Star Trek takes on questions of today and puts them in that science fiction field. So, the Enterprise is a starship with the Federation of Planets, and the Earth has solved all of the problems that we are having today. So obviously this is in the future, say some 400 years from now. We have solved global warming, we have no wars, we have no racism whatsoever, and as a matter of fact, our world, Earth, has combined with other planets in our galaxy to put these starships out into space to go and see who is out there, what's going on, what can we learn. So in this episode, we have the Enterprise being captained by Jean-Luc Picard. Now, Jean-Luc Picard is a middle-aged, wise, measured, calm, by-the-book captain. He is joined by his first mate, Will Riker, who is younger, more energetic, a little bit more, let's go. He also has, as a security officer, Lieutenant Worf. Lieutenant Worf is a Klingon, and the Klingons are a race of aggressive, warlike people who used to be our enemies, but we've made peace with them, and now they're on the starship as well. They also have a brilliant robot or android by the name of Data. Data knows everything, but Data desperately wants to be human. But he struggles with emotions because they're so illogical. And speaking of emotions, there is also a woman on board who is Deanna Troi. Deanna Troi is an empath, which means she has the great skill of being able to know how people feel and what they are thinking. And this is a great thing that Star Trek does, is that actually these characters and the characters that I just described, they represent humans. They represent some of our strongest ways of being, our strongest personality traits, and the differences that we have. So, in this particular episode, they have gone to meet a new race called the Tamarians. So the starship is in Tamarian space, and the Tamarian ship has greeted them, and the two ships are facing each other, and the large screen on the bridge is on so that the two races can see each other. And amazingly, the Tamarians look just about exactly as we do. And they're all smiling, and on the Enterprise, everybody's smiling, and there's great enthusiasm. We're going to meet a new people, a new world, and we're going to work towards peace. And Picard stands up front and he says, "Welcome." And then he goes into a practiced, welcoming, open-armed welcome to this new race. Now, the Enterprise has this amazing device on board called the Universal Translator. And the Universal Translator is a computer that's able to quickly analyze an alien race and turn it into, luckily for us, English. And then it can also take English and turn it into the alien language. So the computer has analyzed the Tamarian language and has said, no problem. This will easily translate, and ours will easily translate to them. But as Picard is giving his practiced welcome, he's noticing that the Tamarians are looking at him completely puzzled. It looks like they don't understand. And Picard ends and looks expectantly towards the Tamarian crew. The Tamarian crew look at each other, and their captain, whose name is Dathan, comes up to the screen and he says, "Temba, his arms held wide." And everyone on the Tamarian ship nods their heads and says, yes, this is good. Well, the Enterprise does not know what this is, right? They look at each other, they still have their smiles plastered on each other's faces, and Picard goes in and says, yes, this is an auspicious day. But the Tamarians look a little confused, and Dathan steps forward again and says, "Temba, his arms held wide." Again, expectant that something has been said here. They don't understand. And you can tell, they start looking around and they're talking, and the different crew members are talking to their captains. And on the ship, or on the Enterprise, Riker is saying, we best go into defensive posture. And Worf says, I suggest we load the photon torpedoes. And Deanna Troi says, I sense great agitation in the Tamarian crew. And Data says, we are being scanned, Captain. And at that moment, the captain feels himself dissolving and dematerializing in that way that happens when people are beamed from ship to planet, and he disappears. And when he rematerializes, he finds himself on a planet, the planet that was below the ships, which is called El Adril. And materializing next to him is the captain, Dathan. He looks at Dathan and he says, I don't know what you're up to, but this is a breach of intergalactic truce recommendations. This I can guarantee you the Enterprise will get me back. And Dathan puts his hand on Picard's shoulder and says, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. Oh, Picard, again, I don't know what are you saying to me? And Dathan says to him again, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. This means nothing to Picard. Picard is upset. They don't know what to do. This doesn't get any better, and as night starts to fall, they separate and they go to find shelter. After a fitful night, Picard is woken hearing the voice of Dathan, and he sounds like he's in trouble. He's yelling. Picard jumps up and comes out from the tree that he was behind, and he sees that over against a cliff wall, there is the captain, Dathan, and he is being aggressively approached by this horrible lizard man dinosaur creature that's coming slowly closer and closer to him. And Dathan is yelling, and he sees the Captain Picard, and he waves to him, and he says, Macron went to the other side. Macron went to the other side. And Picard is thinking, again, what is this? What is he talking about? But it occurs to Picard, he's like he's talking about someone. He's like, who is this Macron? What? And it occurs to him that possibly Dathan is telling him he needs his help, telling him he needs him to do something. And he thinks, as a matter of fact, if I was to go to the other side of the cliff over there, I could distract that monster. And so he does that. He goes to the other side, and he makes noise, and the monster, the lizard man, turns and starts to move towards him, which allows Dathan to escape. Dathan moves away from the corner where he was and starts to yell, Picard! Picard, confused the beast. Picard doesn't know what he's saying, but then Dathan goes to another area and starts to yell and throw rocks at the lizard. And the lizard is then confused and stops approaching Picard. And in that moment, Picard thinks, wait a second. I'm understanding in some odd way he's talking about things that have happened. He's talking about other things, stories, and that is somehow how he's communicating. Now, before this gets too tricky, let me just explain real quick that that's in fact what it is that happens, that they understand that the Tamarians communicate through these stories. They communicate by referring things that have happened, things they know, things from their past, things from their people. And when they can refer to these stories, everyone knows, yes, I understand. I understand what to do from our past. This informs me. And so, over the course of the episode, the two manage to fight off this challenge by figuring out how to rudimentarily tell their stories to each other. And once they start to know each other in this life and death situation, knowing what's at stake, they are able to communicate. Suddenly, Picard feels himself dematerializing, and he is beamed back on board the Enterprise. The Enterprise, where the two crews have been going at each other, and they are about to start war. They are about to start firing on each other. Picard sees what's going on. He stands up, he turns towards the Tamarians and says, Picard and Dathan on El Adril. They stop, they look, they listen, and he says, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. And immediately they turn off their weaponry, and they put their hands down, and they put their ears out, and they understand there is a story that they are going to be told. And Picard goes on to then tell them about what has happened between the captain and them. And we believe then that they go on to begin to build a peaceful relationship. I love this story. It was confusing. It was weird. I remember seeing it and thinking, what a weird, weird episode this is. But it has a truth in it that I just love. People can't really understand each other until they know each other and they can't communicate until they know stories. And as long as their stories are completely separate, what's the chance that they'll really understand each other? In this story, the captains have to take on a challenge together, a life and death story, and they begin to understand each other quite well. We are in a world where we are facing lots and lots of challenges to our very being, right? And I don't know how many times we can have a universal translator fix things for us. We in the dominant culture don't realize that we have a way of communicating, a way of understanding that we think everybody understands, and it's just not so. It comes from our story, from our picture. But we need to start making those stories include each other, right? We need to have shared stories as we fight together, as we face our challenges. When we have those stories, we will be able to live long and prosper. Make it so.
Though our ministry is now largely online, the church's financial obligations continue. Your support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to each other and to the world. We know that some of you have had your hours reduced and that some of you are furloughed or have lost your job. Please let us know if you are facing financial difficulty. We're here to help. But don't let fear undermine your commitment to the ministries we share. Please do your best to be generous with the church so that the church, in turn, can maintain our staff and programs and keep our promises to the many community partners our Sunday offerings support. For the past 10 years, Unity Church has joined other neighborhood churches under the umbrella name of Faith Builders to staff 2 weeks of volunteer labor for Habitat for Humanity home construction in the St. Paul area. The larger part of today's offering will continue to fund this shared work and may also support Habitat's new at-home fund, dedicated to assist Habitat homeowners who are struggling to make their mortgage payments due to COVID-19. We've also just learned this past week that Unity members will again be participating in Habitat home construction this summer with other churches as part of Faith Builders. The St. Paul building site will be following strict procedures to accommodate the challenges of COVID-19. If you would like to volunteer, I encourage you to watch the church's website and emails for more information about how to sign up for that project. Today, to support Habitat for Humanity's work financially, we hope you'll give generously to the offering. During the offering interlude, please visit Unity's homepage and follow the link in the Sunday service section to make your donation. You can also use the Give function located in our Shelby Next membership app, an online database, or the good old-fashioned way of mailing a check to the church. Thank you for your generous donations.
We are a gentle, angry we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a justice-seeking people, and we are singing, singing for our lives.
The Cities Inside Us by Alberto Rios. We live in secret cities, and we travel unmapped roads. We speak words between us that we recognize, but which cannot be looked up. They are our words. They come from very far inside our mouths. You and I, we are the secret citizens of the city inside us, and inside us, there go all the cars we have driven and seen. There are all the people we know and have known. There are all the places that are, but which used to be as well. This is where they went. They did not disappear. We each take a piece through the eye and through the ear. It's loud inside us, in there, and when we speak in the outside world, we have to hope that some of that sound does not come out, that an arm not reach out in place of the tongue.
Who are our people? Who are we? These questions. We've sometimes addressed these questions head on at Unity, sometimes flinched away from them, sometimes engaged them with trepidation, all while we work on one of our aspirations: to create a multicultural spiritual home built on authentic relationships. And it's so clear, in light of our fourth principle, that we must continually assess these questions of who we are, of what our culture is. Unitarian Universalism's fourth principle empowers us all, asks us all to participate in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. For many of us, wounded by religious traditions of our youth, this has meant seeking truth and meaning from sources outside of our own family or faith traditions, outside our own cultures or ideological frameworks. And yet, back to our aspiration to create a multicultural spiritual home, we also need to turn that free and responsible search back onto ourselves, onto the culture we inherit as Unitarian Universalists and continually co-create at Unity Church. In order to become multicultural in any skilled or effective or responsible way, we need to know what our culture is in this present moment. And frankly, what is our whiteness? What is our culture of whiteness, and how is unity culture implicated in white supremacy culture? It's not that we're an all-white congregation or faith tradition by any means. People of color are and have been part of Unitarian Universalism and this congregation for a long, long time. But we know that too often white Unitarian Universalists are prone to individual forms of introspection rather than assessing ourselves as a collective culture. This is the work that people of color in this faith have been asking us to do for decades. Whiteness and racism are for white people to unpack. It's wrong and it's unfair to expect our siblings of color to bear this burden on our behalf. The scholar Sarah Ahmed tells us that it has been commonplace for whiteness to be represented as invisible, as the unseen or the unmarked, as a non-color, the absent presence or hidden referent against which all other colors are measured as forms of deviance. She goes on, but of course whiteness is only invisible for those who inhabit it. This invisible centering and norming of whiteness is problematic on its face, of course, but it's also a conceit that allows white culture to do active harm. Here's a way this caught my attention recently. Some of you may know of the food writer and influencer Alison Roman. Roman, who is white, writes for the New York Times and other national publications, and is something of an Instagram celebrity. She's one of the rare food writers who've actually had recipes go viral, recipes that are known with a hashtag prefix like the cookies. Hashtag the cookies. Anyhow, Roman had a recipe for a stew, and this recipe went viral. It simply became hashtag the stew. And it didn't take long before observers noted that this stew, with chickpeas, coconut milk, and turmeric, bore similarities to curries created in parts of India and the Caribbean. But when the stew first went viral, the written description that appeared with the recipe was stripped of any such cultural references. Critics accused Roman of appropriation, of profiting from ideas without giving credit to their cultures of origin. Now, cultural appropriation is complicated and an important topic for white culture to wrestle with. But today I want to focus on another aspect of this episode, which is that when cultural appropriation claims were made against Roman, her response was telling. She responded, "I don't come from a culture that knows about curry. I come from no culture. I have no culture. I'm vaguely European." I suggest to us that the very lack of ability to identify one's own culture is part of what enables racist harm. If I believe I have no culture, I have a spiritual and material vacuum to fill. And how do I fill it? By borrowing, buying, or stealing from elsewhere. By objectifying cultural products. It's not a respectful exchange, it's a consumerist use of culture. It allows me to treat culture like a supermarket aisle I walk down, picking up an item from that shelf, an artifact from another. And at the same time, a denial of any cultural belonging enables white people to wield unseen, racially defined cultural power while claiming innocence in that power dynamic. It's insidious. But here's an even more critical thing for us to understand. Culture is about food, of course, and about the arts, and clothing, and holiday celebrations, and ritual. But it's about a lot more, too. Culture is about how we express love, how we use physical touch, what we consider beautiful, how we convey respect, how we understand power in relationships, whether we talk about money or sex in public, how we engage with the natural world, who is granted our trust easily and who must earn it the hard way, and the framework we use when we assess the motives of the people around us. all of these are often silent norms or things white culture tends to attribute to individual behaviors or to personal histories and tastes or to habit. But together, how we do all these sorts of things and more amounts to culture, even as we acknowledge that no culture is monolithic. While much of UU culture is located within white culture, we know it to occupy a particular space there as part of a liberal religious tradition. A small example for consideration. Here at Unity and in many other UU congregations, many of us call our ministers by their first names. Perhaps that practice aligns with our desire for equality in relationships or in our distaste for overt hierarchies. But UU religious professionals of color have sometimes described that practice as off-putting or disrespectful, suggesting that when someone's title or as pastor or reverend is omitted, that we are failing to see and know them in their fullness, see the struggles and achievement and effort that went into obtaining that credential. And should not the church be a place where all feel seen and loved, especially for those who in the outer world face discrimination and diminishment? I'm not here to suggest that there's any one right way to use titles or not. I'm simply using this as a small example to illustrate how different cultural perspectives mean that we can look at the same issue in vastly different ways, and that if we aren't clear about the questions we need to apply to our own cultural expressions, white people run the risk of positioning white cultural norms at the center of any discussion without realizing or acknowledging it. Philosopher George Yancey has written that asking white people to examine themselves as white returns to white people the problem of whiteness. He goes on, "While I see this as a gift, I know that not all gifts are free of discomfort. Indeed, some are heavy laden with great responsibility." Let's talk about that uncomfortable gift, that great responsibility, and what we do with it. One of the culture-bound stories that my white family tells about itself is this: our family values education. It's a simple story, a one-dimensional story, that parents in our family have used both as a source of pride and, conveniently, as a way to convey expectations to our young ones. And indeed, it's a demonstrably true story. On my mother's side of the family, I come from at least 4 generations of college-educated people, women included. On my father's side, my grandparents had much less formal education. My grandfather did not complete middle school, and yet all 3 of their children, my father included, went on to obtain doctoral degrees. All of that education was hard-earned, and yet any responsible, clear-eyed view of my father's achievement and that of his siblings requires that I acknowledge that their path was smoothed by whiteness and their ability to adjust to the predominantly white culture of the Big Ten university they attended. They worked hard, true, but some of their access to the benefits of higher education was unearned, and some of it likely came at the expense of equally qualified, equally hardworking people of color. But let's get a little deeper. It's not enough to merely assess how whiteness and white culture granted my family members and me unfair privileges, privileges that translated into financial and social forms of wealth. Let's also take a look at how white culture and our access to it was enmeshed in white supremacy culture. Many of us participated in UU white supremacy culture teach-ins several years ago, which helped us identify key components of that culture. Among them, worship of the written word to the detriment of other types of communication and knowledge sharing. Whew, I think I see that in my family story. The dots practically connect themselves. Another trait of white supremacy culture is the fossilization of the concept of objectivity and the belief that there is the possibility of being completely objective or neutral, and the associated belief that emotions are inherently irrational and do not belong in decision-making processes. Whew, I think that's part of my family's culture of valuing higher education too, and the lives it has enabled us to have. Even more challenging to consider is that another white supremacy culture trait, power hoarding, is embedded in the cultural value of higher education. Power hoarding is the idea that there's only so much power to go around and that it must be held in the hands of a qualified few. It's hard to argue that that's not a part of an academic process in which a small number of people have access to the most prestigious credentials, and those credentials are a prerequisite to career success in certain fields. Again, all of this rumination does not undermine the hard work that my family members and myself have put into our educational journeys, nor does it undermine all the positives of education and the way new ideas and intensive forms of study can expand our horizons both literally and figuratively and act in service to the world. But what I am saying is that context matters. Our cultural context of whiteness and white supremacy culture matters because we must understand this context and ourselves in order to act as responsible agents of change and justice in the world. It's like this. We all carry cultural baggage with us. For those raised to hold tight the often invisible pillars of white supremacy culture, one piece of luggage might be labeled objectivity. Another might be labeled worship of the written word. If I carry that baggage with me onto a crowded train, but I don't know I'm carrying it, I don't even feel it in my hands. And if my own baggage is invisible to me, I'm more likely to throw it around carelessly and bump that baggage into other people on the train, hurting them. And if they say to me, "Ouch, that hurt," I don't know how to respond, because to me that baggage isn't a weapon. It's not even something I know exists. However, if I'm lugging that same baggage onto the crowded train, but I do see it as white supremacy cultural baggage, I can be more skillful about how I move through the train. I can pull that suitcase back before it slams into my neighbor's shins. I can work to make the suitcase smaller or less heavy. And if I do hurt someone with it, which I likely will, I can see how it happened, I can take responsibility, apologize without defensiveness, and make amends. In his poem, The Cities Inside Us, Alberto Rios describes this using another metaphor, a more lovely one. There are cities inside each of us, loud, invisible cities. These are our cultural infrastructure. And when in Rios's words, we speak in the outside world, we have to hope that an arm does not reach out in place of the tongue. This is what excavating our cultural self-awareness does for us. It allows us to more thoughtfully move our baggage and to ensure that when we speak, it's not with an accidental arm, but with a deliberate tongue. Cultural self-awareness brings us not only greater skill, it brings the possibility of greater intimacy. Think about it with me. When you call to mind your closest relationships with a dear friend, a partner, a parent, or child, what allows us emotional intimacy? Intimacy comes from truly seeing and being seen, knowing and being known, seeing and knowing one another in our wholeness, our brokenness, our flaws, and our delights. Spiritually and emotionally mature relationships can grow where this intimacy exists. And this brings me back to where I began, with our aspiration to create a multicultural, spiritual home built on authentic relationships. It just may be that the authentic relationship requires we journey into cultural self-knowledge, and that our journey doesn't place our own culture as the sun in the center of a solar system, but as one part of a constellation. Doing so may bring us into real and right relationship with one another. It may foster clarity. It may bring us closer to a more complete truth. It may cultivate humility. It may lay the groundwork for greater intimacy. It may enable us to find and create more love. May it be so, and amen. Friends, we have the power of insight. May we cultivate it with love. May we use it with deliberate care. May we allow it to transform us.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.